On today's episode, we learn about how forced injections are not human rights violations, how democracy is the backbone of the country. We'll take a look at how the Ontario Highway Safety Division keeps people safe by punishing them for good choices, and why utter failure in government isn't cause for losing your job. This is Cringe Post. Hey friends, welcome to this show of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that you see in your feed every week, and we break them down, show where they went wrong, point out the underlying assumptions, and have a little bit of fun along the way. And of course, before we poke fun at anyone else or point out where anyone else has gone wrong, we like to show where we've gone wrong in the past to show that, we all grow out of our cringe takes, and everyone can improve and get better. My name's Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donnie. Before we get started, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. All the interaction helps us get out this message of anti-cringe and to the world. And obviously, we want to work ourselves out of a job by helping the world not be so cringy. Before we get started, though, we like to take a shot at ourselves. And I forgot to mention, we have a visual guide to our show. If you go to cringepost.com, you can click on that. If you're listening right now and you want to see the cringe visually, whatever meme or post or whatever, just go to cringepost.com and click on the links there, and it'll take you to a slide deck so you can kind of go along this cringe journey with us. Today, for our self-cringe, we're going to take a look at Donald Kimball, and he posted in September of 2010, and he wrote... I think people who can't appreciate poetic music have lost a whole sense of music in general. For a song to be catchy is momentarily invigorating, maybe, but a quality poetic song is timeless. That was hard to read. Like, you're not very poetic in your writing for someone with such a high opinion of music.
This one, I've had a lot of bad posts on the show, but man, seeing this one, I recoiled. It's so pretentious and gatekeepy, like as if I'm some arbiter of what constitutes as actually good music, and everyone else who likes music that's, low brow, they're just missing a whole sense of music. Oh, get over yourself, Donald. Good
I can
grief.
tell you I can tell you even thought about how to word it, so you sounded very intellectual. And it didn't come out smooth. It didn't come out smooth.
Oh, no, it's so gross. And the thing is, like, I think
you wouldn't have liked my Owl City's the most creative musician out there vibe back
right.
then.
I think at that point I was actually, in that year, I probably had a friend who liked Owl City, and I was still sort of, okay, well, maybe there's some merit to liking it. But I was still sort of fresh of forming my own music opinions at that point. So I think in like a couple years prior, I'd started branching out from my dad's music, which was, punk, alt-American, alt-rock, All-American Rejects, Good Charlotte, that kind of stuff. And then by this time, I'd sort of found my own music identity, which is stuff that I still kind of like today. Stuff like the Decemberists and the Shins, and more of sort of the folk indie type scene. But because of that, I thought, like, wow, there is this level of music that has been hitherto unachieved. Like people who just want to dance to music, they don't even get music. It's like, no, it's okay to
more
just
than you did.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's okay to just jam out to a song past Donald. It's okay. You don't need to gatekeep music, for heaven's sake. And you're not even gatekeeping it well.
Yeah. It's when I look at our past takes and stuff, like the stuff that is the most cringy is definitely the things that, like, it's where like we think we have the world figured out and we're 17 and we're gonna push down all the little lowbrow people around us, and this is very representative of that theme of our past cringes.
Absolutely, yeah. Nothing shows that you don't know what you don't know more than some of these posts. So.
Love it. All right, moving on from your highbrow music tastes. Our first cringe post of the day. We actually had someone comment on one of our tweets, and they did a reply, and I promised them that I would feature them because it was just so cringy. So keeping to that promise. Because they came to us, I think we out them. So this person's named Taylor Barnett, Nerdy for Design, and they've got what is it, constitutional lawyer or expert or whatever in their bio?
Constitutional law nerd.
Constitutional law nerd. So keep that in mind. This is a constitutional law nerd. So we posted a meme. It's kind of that NPC meme that shows like, a person, if you're watching or listening, like an NPC person saying, "Hey, I would stop the Nazis. Hey, I would have fought with Bernie for civil rights." And then with the vaccine mandates, it's like, and the trucker freedom convoy, like, "No, throw them all in jail," basically. And the NPC meme kind of going through that. And our title says is holding popular opinions is not necessarily a virtue. Being the foregone conclusion that, these people that hold the popular opinions today probably would have held the popular opinions that threw Jews in concentration camps or tried to discriminate against minorities back in the 1960s. So constitutional law nerd Taylor Barnett replied to our tweet, "The difference being no actual rights are being violated when it comes to fake protesters crying about having to take a shot or wear a mask." I don't know, man. That constitutional thing where it's like, hey, I know there's that, the 51st Amendment that says, the government can mandate what you put in your body, but I just don't agree with that. Wait.
You'd think that the right to peacefully assemble and protest, even if let's grant him this idea that they're fake protesters because all they have to do is take a shot and wear a mask, and that's a completely illegitimate concern. Nothing about that is warranting. Let's take that for a second, okay? We still constitutionally, he might perk up at that word, we have a right to protest and assemble peaceably. And I'm pretty sure that and of course this is in Canada, so it's a different constitution, right? But at least the principles here should apply. So, if you have the right to peaceful assembly and protest, you probably don't exactly think that it's a great thing when the police are coming in and trampling you with their horse, injuring people, and physically assaulting people in that way with tear gas and things like that, in a completely peaceful assembly and protest, which has happened to multiple people in this convoy. So let's assume, for the sake of steel manning this argument, that what you put into your body and your own life decisions and your own autonomy is absolutely worth nothing. Your rights are still being violated by being trampled on by horses from the freaking Mounties because they're getting spooked because they're riding through a crowded area that, again, is completely peaceful. So I don't know. I don't see how you can make the claim that there were no rights violated. Maybe just some of the rights that you don't like were being violated, but all rights were being violated.
Yeah, what always gets me about these types of people is when they say things like, no, it's like you definitely have the choice. Like, you can either choose to not have a job, be homeless, not be able to feed your family, and die on the street, or you can take the vaccine. Like, it's your choice. And it's like, okay, you can't gaslight me that much. Like, that's pretty wild, even for you. I've heard this argument before, and I think it's because these people value like they value appeals to authority, right? And so it's like with the Nuremberg Code, right? Like the way they classify a permissible medical experiment or medical treatment is like someone that is aware of the risks and can voluntarily submit to actually undergoing the treatment. If you don't have the voluntary assumption of that treatment, or if they're not made aware of the risks or those risks are concealed from them, then it's considered to violate that Nuremberg Code. And I think you can pretty forcefully make the argument that, one, these vaccines, now that's coming out that Pfizer and a lot of these pharmaceuticals hid data, of risk and concealed it from the public regarding, the risk of taking these vaccines. And then two, I think you can reasonably say that people have been coerced at the risk of their livelihood, jobs, and well-being to take this shot, right? Especially given what the truckers at least are protesting in Ottawa, especially saying, hey, you can either have a livelihood or you can take this shot, right? And that's what they're protesting is, get the shot or stop driving trucks. And so, this person, maybe they don't really care about the Nuremberg Code as much as they care about the Constitution, even though I think you and I both would agree the Constitution basically affirms the same things, the right to bodily autonomy. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would say this to Taylor. And, Taylor, if you are watching this, I'll definitely DM you a link to our podcast. But if you're watching this, film a response and, we'll air it and we'll keep going back and forth. Or if you want to come on the show and debate it, happy to do that as well. We're all about that open discussion. So yeah, I hope you listen to this and we can have a dialogue about it. But we think you're pretty cringe, and this post is pretty cringe. But you can grow beyond it, as we've shown. You're not like not as far gone as Donnie with his highbrow poetic music tastes. So
I've probably said something cringier in the last week. It's okay. We've all gone low.
We've all gone there. So let's work it all out. Any more
Absolutely.
on this one?
No, I'm good.
Cool. All right, moving on to our next one. We have Mark E. Elias, who's a blue check verified, and Ari Cohn, and then someone who's not blue check verified. And it's a Twitter thread. So Mark Elias wrote, "If the media is not going to be pro-democracy, then it probably is time for the courts to revisit New York Times v. Sullivan, as conservative lawyers suggest. The case was premised on a role in democracy that the mainstream press seems increasingly disinterested in playing." And then Ari Cohen replied, "Its role in democracy isn't to publish what you want it to publish." Good point. And then this other Twitter user replies, "LOL, this is such a stupid point. If you're wrong, you're wrong. This is about democracy, the backbone of the country, not about personal preference. USA's role in democracy is to promote democracy. The media should be pro-democracy. This should not be debatable." So I'm not terribly familiar with like the Times v. Sullivan deal and like any premises on democracy or anything like that. But one of the things that I found pretty funny about at least the original tweet from Mark Elias is like, these I think it mainly comes from one side, but it does happen on both. They will use the other side's arguments out of context to like beat them into submission or attempt to like make a point, like with the vaccine mandates, it's like Republicans saying to Democrats, "Well, aren't you pro-choice?" It's like, okay, like that's not a good argument, and that is unfair and doesn't make any sense. So I just couldn't really stand that the little quip he's put in there is, as conservative lawyers suggest, which I think conservative lawyers kind of suggest that because basically it makes it almost impossible, right, to prove defamation from. You're better knowledge on this. I don't know too much on it.
Yeah, I haven't done a full deep dive in it. Maybe we could ask a constitutional law nerd who's maybe done a little bit more on it. But
I think I know one.
Yeah. But from what I understand, this of course was the case that allowed or set a higher standard for a politician, and I think it got extended to just public figure. More broadly speaking, to have a higher threshold for defamation, since they have to show malintent and malice. So I'm also not familiar with the specific connections to democracy, but yeah, it has to do with free speech being held and sort of a more expansive definition of free speech for the individual, saying that no, free speech of criticizing like a politician or someone like that is allowed, and only if you're doing something, defaming someone with malintent that can be demonstrably proved, can you be held up for defamation or things like that. So I would say overall, probably a good premise. And so it's just really funny though to see this turnaround about how the reply of its role in democracy isn't to publish what you want it to publish. Like you don't get to tell the media that their role is to support this ideology.
That's their end goal.
Yeah. And this person's like, "What? No, that's a stupid point. The whole point is that the media has to be pro-democracy." And you're like, What? The whole point of free speech is that you should be able to say which speech you can and can't say. Well, that's such a stupid parameter to arbitrarily put in place. I don't think in any of the founding documents of rights enumerated for free speech or a free press, I don't think you see the founder saying, and we want to make sure that this is specifically held in the cases where it is promoting our values. Now, that's how a lot of the authoritarians used it. I think, like, you look at John Adams and the way that he totally did not uphold the idea of free speech, right? Because he thought the press was, with the Sedition Act, he was going against the United States government. And that's the kind of advocacy we get in this last cringe post where it's like the USA's role in democracy is to promote democracy. It should be pro-democracy, not debatable. It's like, or else what? You want to reenact the Sedition Act where journalists are getting arrested for being like maybe not anti-America or anti-democracy? That's an absurdity, and it flies in the face of a small, limited government. It flies in the face of civil liberties. Like, it doesn't matter if you're right or left. This is the one thing that you should kind of come together and agree on, that like if you're pro-small government, or no government, but pro-small government, you shouldn't want a government big enough to be able to punish you for what you're saying. And two, especially when it comes to criticizing the government, like, good grief. And then two, if you're pro-civil liberty, you probably don't want a government big enough to silence a minority, a dissenting minority, who's speaking out against it. I don't see how you can be sort of this censoring any media outlet that's not pro-democracy.
The part that really gets me, and people say this stuff all the time, like, and they're not thinking about it, they just heard it from somewhere, when he goes, this is about democracy, the backbone of the country. And it's like, really? Like, you think that's that's definitely what makes America strong, right? Is the ability for the majority to rule the minority. It's like, no, like that's not even close, to what makes America special. What makes America special is that the folks in Wyoming are not going to be governed by the folks in California. And that is not democracy, because there's way more people in California than there are in Wyoming. And some people think that's bad, right? Which is kind of crazy. They're like, well, we want to have a democracy with minority protections. It's like, well, in a democracy where the majority rules, who gets to decide which minorities are protected, right? It's like, no, it always breaks down towards, in a true democracy, with the 49% being victimized by the 51%. And but this is what we're taught, right? Not you and me. We were cool and homeschooled, but the folks in public school, right? They're taught this, right? That's like, oh, what makes America special is democracy. Our culture does it. Like, I think about Obi-Wan Kenobi and Revenge of the Sith. My loyalty is to democracy, and it's like, like, that's not, democracy is not the good thing that we've been taught it is, right? Like, it's really, it's just the majority ruling the minority, and these people understand that in other aspects of their lives, right? They understand that, like, it's not good for the people that are in power or have more people to rule over people that are smaller. They would never let that happen in their individual lives or any of the communities that they exist in, because they believe in principle and actual rights when it's really close to them. But the farther away these things get from them, the less they actually think about, about the actual implementations of it, and then they speak more in platitudes, and that's what's so deceiving, right? Because it's like, someone reading this would be like, oh, you're right, like, democracy is the backbone of the country, and if democracy is the backbone of the country, then the media should be pro-democracy. And it's like, well, that you lost the plot, a couple lines back, right? Where, one, democracy is not necessarily a good thing, and maybe democracy and becoming, a democracy should be debated, and who's going to present the other side of that, right? Because we're not a democracy, we're something else, and contrary to what these folks would say. But that's how they get you, right? They establish a false premise and then lead you a couple lines down, so you're not even arguing about the thing that was wrong in the first place.
Right, and to further that point, like, let's sort of steelman this a bit and say that if you're saying, if you're granting that it is a democratic republic, it's not a perfect democracy, but what makes the backbone of the country, or the country's identity, or what makes America stand out in this way, is the democratic elements of the United States, right? Like a democratically elected republic. Let's say that's the case. I would argue that no, the democratic elements that make the U.S. great, like, what the closest thing that I would associate in my mind to democratic greatness in the U.S. is the sort of democratic way in which people can make their own individual choices, and that, like, voluntarily a company or someone making a product getting the votes with dollars, or a place being great by the movement of the votes of people moving there and their feet moving there. Like, all these kinds of things are the good elements of democracy. The idea that, if you make something that helps a lot of people, and you can be successful from that, or if you don't like something, you can persuade other people away from it as well, and you can have this sort of free moving and leaving. It's not an authoritarian, you must buy this product, you must control this way. There's sort of a democratic element to our free market in a sense, which is not even perfectly democratic in that you have niche markets that hit a minority of people, and that's all you need for that, and all this kind of stuff. So even at its best, in my opinion, it's not a great equation to democracy, because democracy, you generally speaking, entails you necessarily preventing the minority from their will being done. Whereas I think in the broad sense of American democracy in cultural, ways and stuff like that, it's more that democracy or democratic trends tend to benefit the producers who produce good things, right? But even still, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty, as far as backbones of the country, if you're looking from a strictly political angle of the founding of the country, the founders are pretty darn intent on making it not democratic, making some aspects democratic, but literally making a Senate that was not elected by the people. It was elected through two layers, right? You had to elect your legislature, then your legislator elected your senators, and that was true up until 1913. And so like they were very intent on it being a very not democratic democracy, right? A very Republican democratic system.
Yes. Yeah, and the thing about the last thing I'll say in this is the last part of this guy's reply is that the media should be pro-democracy, right? It's like, well, like if the media is like, let's just say, Fox has the highest amount of viewership, right? Well, wouldn't you call that democracy? Like they're choosing Fox, right? Regardless of whether you and I think about Fox and, whether we enjoy it or not, which we don't, like people have chosen that. And that's when how you kind of get to the root of these folks' like intentions is democracy is anything that I like. And that's what Ari Cohen said very aptly in the first reply is that, its role in democracy isn't to publish what you want it to publish. It's to publish whatever the heck it wants to publish and thinks it should publish. And if it's publishing things that are lies or falsehoods or are not, not resonating with the people, like whatever news outlet is going to slowly and in some cases quickly diminish, as we're seeing with some of the more liberal outlets like CNN and all that. And the rise of things like podcasting and like Joe Rogan and all these different, that are just crushing it in the numbers because they're actually presenting real information, right? Like, and that's the difference between, I think, like these people's version of democracy. It's like it's you do you, right? That's what we're advocating for is you do you. And if 51% of people want to do this type of thing or they want this type of media, then they can do that, and then the other 49% can go do another one and let the arguments win, and whoever captures the market, and that's great. And that's called being voluntary, right?
And I'd say, and the great thing about a free market is that even if you have a minority, if you have a small minority, but it's a dedicated small minority, you can still profit, you can still grow, and you can still be totally successful. It's why you see things like indie films take off, you have indie games take off, you have indie TV shows, you have indie products, you have niche specialized markets to people who are by no means a majority. They're not even close to a plurality. But there's, a need or a desire they have, and someone meets it well, and then they can profit off that. And it's wonderful, and it's great.
It's
so
awesome.
Very anti-democratic ultimately, but in a good way.
But they're very pro-human.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Everyone gets what they need.
Yes.
All right. Our next one, it's a response to a National Review article, and the headline for the article is Jimmy Carr's joke was funny, and if you don't agree, so what? And then this person replied to the tweet, that's like people arguing that opposing viewpoints on the Holocaust should be taught in schools. There is no such valid view that isn't literally Nazi. This isn't about canceling a Republican device from the 1980s, but a toxic lack of character that you apparently share. And these folks are talking about Jimmy Carr has a Netflix special, and in it he makes a joke about like, hey, it was awful, 6 million Jews were killed, but no one talks about the positives, which is that a couple thousand gypsies were killed. Kind of riffing on the UK's disdain for gypsies and all that stuff. And I don't particularly find it funny because I'm not really immersed in that culture, right? So I don't really get all the different dynamics of that. But apparently a lot of people did find it funny, and and kind of going back again to these people trying to say that like, oh, Republicans do that or Democrats, what about pro-choice? His little quip about it's the canceling is a Republican device from the 1980s. I think probably referring to like the moral majority or whatever deal for the Falwells. It's just, man, I don't like this effort to cancel comedians, right? Like comedians are supposed to be on the edge. And sometimes maybe they make jokes they regret, like Joe Rogan talks about. And then if they regret them, they apologize for them. But it's like if you don't like it, who cares? Just don't listen to them. Don't give them your money. And maybe if no one listens or thinks that Jimmy Carr's Netflix special is funny, then maybe Netflix probably won't renew it, for a second season. What are your thoughts?
Well, to me, this is so interesting because, again, if you just lay out sort of the aspects of the joke, right? Like, and you don't put it in a funny way. You just sort of say, okay,
sure.
Holocaust was bad because it killed a lot of people, but the Holocaust was also good because it killed this group of people. Like, of course it's not funny. It's all in the delivery. It's all in the absurdity of the premise. You set up an expectation and then you change it at the last second into something that you're like, oh my gosh, that's a shock factor. So if I'm not mistaken, I think the way that he pitched it was even saying something about, we always talk about the 6 million Jews that died, but we never bring up all the gypsies that died. Yeah, well, no one wants to bring up the positives of it, right? Like you're even pitching it in that way where you're pitching like, oh, I'm also bringing up another tragedy because the common thing is to highlight the other things that get overlooked, and then you spin it as like, oh, but it's a positive, which is obvious. It's a joke, and to me.
Yes.
That's the crazy thing about this is like you don't have to like the joke, and that's kind of this National Review article by Charles Cook. I like Charles Cook, by the way. For National Review, I don't always agree with. I like Charles Cook. I think he's a pretty good writer and pretty interesting thinker and fellow. And so that's sort of the premise of this. It's like if you're offended, but that's okay. Like the entire point is that this is a joke. When you're giving a comedy special, you are saying things in there that are necessarily jokes because it's a comedy special where you tell jokes, right? And so this person just discounts that. It's not about canceling someone. It's just a toxic lack of character. It's like, have you never said anything have you never said anything sarcastically? Have you ever said anything exaggerated? Have you ever spoken in a non-literal manner? Because all jokes is taking an absurdity and stretching it to a degree. And so, whether your toxic lack of character is that far, it's just it's just such a I don't know. It's a shortcut to just to having someone be marked as evil without actually explaining why. Because you can think of a lot of things, and laughing at something that is absurd is a natural human response. It does not mean you agree with that thing. It doesn't mean that you are complicit in a crime. A toxic lack of character. I don't know. That line to me just made me roll my eyes so hard because this person has probably never thought an opinion that didn't, line up with the majority opinion in every single way in their whole life. And so the only way that you can dare speak an opinion is to make sure that it's a safe, approved one in society. Otherwise, you risk saying something that might not be what everyone expects. And if that's the case, well, that could be a toxic lack of character. Makes me so mad.
It reminds me, the opening line where this guy's like, that's like people arguing, for opposing viewpoints on the Holocaust being taught in schools. There's no such view on that is not literally being a Nazi. And it's like, okay, like, sure, like I looked at the evidence. I've been to Auschwitz. I've seen all the different stuff. And it's like, whether there was 6 million Jews that were killed or there was, 1 million Jews or whatever that was killed, like a lot of people were killed and it's awful, right? Like, and I've looked at it and examined that, but I would also be fine with the argument being had so that other people can make up their minds. And I think the evidence is overwhelmingly clear, right, that this all happened. And what strikes me about it is these people take the moral position of being like, I don't want to have a debate because like you said, they've never had an opinion that isn't sanctioned by the, by what, the New York Times or whatever, like the authority in place. So they can't back it up. That's why they don't want to debate. So they're left to only result in saying, hey, you're a Nazi if you argue against this. It reminds me of this clip I saw on Joe Rogan where there was a guy, Joe Rogan said, I'm going to have opposite people on, opposite viewpoints on to combat, different things. And he had a climate scientist, guy on that was very, very pro climate control. And the guy literally said, when Joe asked him, like, would you ever consider having someone on to debate, your viewpoints? The guy said, no, I don't want to debate. The science is settled. Like, I don't debate the science. It's like, dude, how are you a scientist if you're not willing to debate, the facts? And that's what's so disturbing about this, is that these people are able to position themselves as the moral superiors. They literally call you a Nazi while also saying, like, if you debate it, like, or if there's any debate around any sort of thing, you're literally the worst human being that could ever exist. And that's kind of the line that comedians toe, right? And that's why they get so offended by them, is comedians are able to, with humor, point out something that is truthful or a really big lie, one of the two. And if you get a laugh out of people, it's because what they're saying has a vein of truth through it, right? Like, it's not funny unless it has some element of truth to it, one way or the other. And the worst thing that can happen with comedian, is they get like the clapter, right? Like, no one's laughing at it. They're just clapping because they think they made some virtuous point, right? Like, that's not comedy. That's a TEDx speech or something. I don't know. Like, it's not, it has no value to comedy. And, that's why the left can't stand comedians, right? It's because they don't want to have debate. They don't want to entertain and potentially have their minds changed.
Yeah. Well, and so that, with the whole debate thing that you brought up, it's like when he's saying, there's no view that isn't a Nazi, so there, shouldn't be taught in schools. Well, if your argument is that the Holocaust was justified, then in that one particular argument, then I would agree, yes, if you take the side that it was justified, there's the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that you are probably a Nazi, right? Yeah. That being said, the nuanced question isn't necessarily, was the Holocaust a good thing? Because this person seems to want to shut down any discussion surrounding the Holocaust. Like, for instance, what was the cause of the Holocaust? Was the Holocaust caused just because all Germans are inherently evil? Was the Holocaust perpetrated because of Europe's action and the West's actions towards Germany? It's like there's so many questions surrounding it, and that's kind of where I see this go, where they're boiling down, this joke should not be said at all. And if you say that it should be said, or that, it's okay that it's funny, then you are, a Nazi. You are an evil person who supports the murder of the gypsies. And it's like, no, the question here isn't, is the quip he made true? Because if the argument here is, yes, I think that him saying that the upside of the Holocaust was the gypsies dying is true, then yes, that would make me a bad person. But no one is arguing that. The argument is whether or not the joke is funny, but furthermore, whether or not the joke should be allowed, or if you should move on with your day. That's the broader question. And so when this article is making the argument that it's funny, but if you don't agree, move on, and he's saying your viewpoint is that of akin to a Nazi justifying the Holocaust, they've missed the point completely, because that's not the discussion you're having. The discussion is, like, for instance, should we shoot people who say that the Holocaust was justified? No, we shouldn't do that, right? But, according to this person, maybe we should, or we should arrest them and put them in prison, because that literally makes them a Nazi, and there's no other discussion to be had. Whereas it's like, no, let's shut down bad ideas with good ones. If you're offended by someone, be offended, disassociate yourself. That's a great right we have in America, is the right to be left alone. Go away from them, don't associate, but don't force everyone else into your worldview, even if you think that they're a bad person for it.
It reminds me, like this, as you're talking through it, it reminded me of the Gina Carano segment, I think it was a year and a half ago or whatever, where she just posted a thing that was like, hey, like in Nazi Germany, like it started slow, and people, they started slow with them turning neighbor against neighbor. So maybe just love your neighbor and we'll stave off some bad stuff. That's pretty inoffensive, like if it's just like, anyway, she got canceled, right? Because people hate that she's a conservative actor in Hollywood. And I'm not a particular fan of her character in The Mandalorian, but she got canceled, right? And because she was comparing, COVID nastiness to the Holocaust or whatever. Very loose tied, but they just didn't like her. But then these same people that canceled her, are fine with Whoopi Goldberg going back on The View after Whoopi Goldberg literally said that the Holocaust was not about race. a much more offensive take, than Gina Carano's take. And I don't think Whoopi should have been canceled for it. I think she got like taken off for a week and then she's been reinstated, as opposed to Gina Carano, who's been blacklisted from all of Hollywood. And it just makes you think, it's like, I don't know, dude, that thinks that, opposing viewpoints on the Holocaust should be taught. I think it's only when it's your side that is trying to advocate for what you want is making certain points that you're okay with it. Because at the end of the day, the same people that advocate for Gina Carano are the ones supporting Whoopi Goldberg. And it's all about power. It's not about principle.
Absolutely.
All right, we've got a post from the Ontario Provincial Police Highway Safety Division. Man, the Highway Safety Division. They posted, true story, last night, 911, what is your emergency? The caller. Can you help me? I am driving, but I'm too drunk to drive. Can you come pick me up and take me home? 911, an officer will be right there. And then they comment, a 27-year-old driver is now charged with impaired driving. She was also issued an automatic 90-day hashtag 90-day license suspension and hashtag 7-day vehicle impound, hashtag Niagara OPP. This is the perfect elements of all things cringy. You've got an authoritarian, awful, obviously police force that is violating people's rights. And then you've got the kind of like, oh, I'm going to be person, corporation, account on Twitter. And then they're literally hashtagging things that no one would ever hashtag, in the thing. Cause it's like, this is some boomer that thinks, oh, well, they do hashtags. Like, this is what I'm going to talk about. Hashtag 7-day vehicle impound. How ugly of them to rejoice in, the punishment of someone who recognized their limits, said, I need help. And then the officer, who is supposed to be the shining beacon of, keeping the peace, shows up and, just totally punishes them. That's just disgusting. These people are not your friends. They're not your friends.
Just yet another example of where the private market would have taken care of you so much more. It's like if you'd pulled over and then called an Uber, you would have gotten home, gotten safety, and then you wouldn't have a 90-day suspension. You wouldn't have a vehicle impound. You wouldn't be charged. It's like, the conservative argument for a lot of harsh laws and punishments, in many cases, is the idea of staving off bad behavior through sort of this punishment idea, right? You punish someone and then you prevent other criminals from doing that thing. And then so it's like, oh, you have a death penalty because then you reduce potential murders because they think, oh, I don't want to get the death penalty, which I think is a pretty weak argument. But let's go with it for a second. If your punishments for drunk driving are to dissuade people from drunk driving, and then someone is drunk driving, and they say, oh my goodness, I should not be doing this, I'm going to call for help. Now you aren't punishing the drunk driving, you're punishing the call for help. So now, by your own logic of, preventing people from, doing things, you see, and you share this example, you've now said, okay, now anyone who's slightly buzzed or maybe worried that they're in no state to drive, they are now prevented from calling in and turning themselves in, and they would rather just risk it. Cool. Good job. And then, of course, if
Highway Safety Division.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how's that safe? And then, of course, it's just entirely punitive for very little reason. I think someone realizing they're too drunk to drive, it's like, yeah, they're probably gonna think about it a second time if they have the wherewithal to call you, to have the self-awareness to know that they were too drunk to drive. That's the kind of person who isn't being reckless, even if they started out reckless. That's the kind of person who the next time they go out to drink, they will think about this experience, without the 90-day suspension and all that.
Yeah, they've created a perverse incentive to drive drunk. And that's the great irony of this entire, the Highway Safety Division. People think about the police force as like crime prevention, right? But the harsh reality of it is The police force is not crime prevention. They are a revenue collection agency that only enforces laws after they have been broken. You are not made safer by having the police force, there. Maybe criminals do go to jail, right? And criminals are held accountable for things that they do. But the police force at the end of the day is not there to prevent crime. They're there to enforce laws. And they're not there to actually, as ironic as this title, Highway Safety Division, they're not there to make the highway safer. They're there to punish people that they think are making the highway less safe. And that's a pretty important distinction. And as we've seen here, right, like I said, it's created a perverse incentive where this person is not going to call the cops. And anyone that sees this post and they have the wherewithal to understand that they're drunk driving is not, the cops are not someone they're going to call. They might not even call an Uber. They're just going to think, well, shoot, I'm going to try and make it home, right? And it's kind of the, I remember there's this producer we work with down in Texas, and he's in a dry county, right? They're not allowed to sell any alcohol in the county. And they passed this, I can't remember, I think it was like in the 80s or something like that. And it was like some county commissioner or mayor's kid died from a drunk driver. So they passed this whole thing. And what's ironic is that now you actually have more drunk driving deaths because people will drive to the county line where there's a bunch of liquor stores, buy liquor, and drink on the way home and crash and die or hit people and die from drunk driving. It's like, okay, if you just left it alone, you wouldn't have created an even worse problem. And that's kind of usually what happens when you do kind of a one size fits all or put people in authority like this.
That's a great example. And another example is in Washington State. They made holding your phone while driving a misdemeanor and an arrestable offense, right? The idea they don't want people texting and driving. Well, ironically, people, now are in much worse shape because the people who were texting and driving still do it, but now instead of holding their phone like this, I don't know if you're watching, in front of your face by the windshield and you're kind of like glancing in front of your car, they now hold it down below so that it's not in the window frame for a cop to see, and they just kind of look down. So now their eyes are taken off the visual level of what's in front of them, and it's made accidents like that worse. It's in order to escape the punishment of the law, you've made everyone less safe. You've also dissuaded people who, like myself, who were using apps like Waze, from being able to report things like slowdowns or object in road or all these kinds of things that helped alert other drivers of hazards while they're driving. So, it's the law of unintended consequences is pretty crazy, and it's just one of those things where I do want to circle back and say that when you're talking about cops only being there, sort of after the fact, there are specific cases where you can get cops to help be a preventative measure to guard, and that's fine. Like there may be people who've had experiences where that's worked and that's been beneficial. That's great. The problem is that is not their primary use, and it's not a reliable use. If you look at the Black Lives Matter protesters, where they stood by in the streets and let people's property get destroyed, let people get injured, and watched as like Kyle Rittenhouse was being chased and assaulted by people, and then he had to defend himself. So there may be individual cases of good cops doing things that to help preempt crime. Sure. But the problem is the system is not set up for that to be the main effective order, and there's not a good system to punish the injustice that occurs when it is not done. Unlike, any sort of private system where no one would hire a private corps of security firm that lets people get damaged. It's like you have a big event, you have a prestigious speaker, and you hire a security guard, and the security guards just let, protesters run through and rough up your speaker. No one would hire that security corps ever. They'd be out of business like that because they were reactive, not proactive. The cops, unfortunately, the system is set up where it's like they would much rather stay back because they don't want to have to risk going to court. And with the way that the courts are set up in, police law, if they go over rough on someone, and they often get let off the hook. So there's, in both directions, there's perverse incentives for them. So it's just a really bad system. And again, there might be good cops and you might have had good experiences where they made you feel safer. And that's great until it isn't. And it's really bad when they're the ones in control doing things like this, or Black Lives Matter, or in Ottawa, the protests, of course, actively harming peaceful protests.
Yeah, as we would say, and I've had good experience with cops. I have many friends who are cops, but the good ones and the good experiences are a bug, not a feature of the system. And that's not their like you were saying, their primary directive. I think about like my church. Like we hire a cop. We pay them, I think it was like $600 Sunday morning to be, it basically is security at the church. It's like, well, that obviously is not their primary directive, right? Like, because you're having to pay extra to have them there on top of, the tax dollars that already go to fund their departments and everything. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I didn't mean to come across as like, no, all cops bad. I definitely don't think that, but that is not a function of their normal job. That is an individual going above and beyond when you have a good experience.
Much like teachers, I find that the ones who are really great at what they do, at public school teachers, I'll specify, the ones who are really great at what they do often get burned out or corrupted, unfortunately. I have a lot of friends who are teachers. I have a lot of friends who are cops. And it's like, it is not a system that intrinsically rewards that kind of responsible, good, overachieving behavior. It's one that burns them out, hems them in through bureaucratic means, and punishes doing the service that the community needs in most cases. And I tend to think that probably the most helpful and best run police departments in general are the ones that are the smallest, the ones in the most rural type counties where it's less of a government entity and more of the town kind of collectively knows everyone. The town would, if they weren't paying taxes for it, would pitch in and pay someone to be the sheriff. The most voluntary looking kinds of situations are the ones that generally work out the best.
Yes.
And that's kind of a system where it's easier and easier to think you could go in a more private direction and it would be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, moving on to our last one. We got a series of tweets here. Some of them featuring Donald, not in the cringe position this time, in the anti-cringe position. So we've got a tweet by Dave Smith, also not cringe, and he wrote, "If we lived in a somewhat sane or responsible society, that John Hopkins study showing lockdowns did nothing to stop the virus would lead to mass resignations and likely criminal charges. The people who implemented lockdowns would never be let anywhere near public policy ever again." And then Blue Check Verified Deregulation is Infrastructure wrote and replied, Don't ever guess wrong about the future, because if you do, you're going to jail." And then a based account wrote, "His original tweet makes perfect sense, though. Where's the accountability for guessing wrong in a position of power?" And then Deregulation is Infrastructure replied, "So whenever someone in a position of power makes a mistake, they need to be punished?" And then our co-host Donald here replied, "So whenever someone in a position of power makes a mistake, they need to be punished? That's not the claim. That's a straw man. His claim has to do with this specific set of actions, which was not only making a mistake, but destroying lives from that mistake." And then Deregulation responds, "Please enumerate the specific actions and which ones need to be punished. Also, please detail what percentage of the population thought these were good ideas at the time." And then you replied, "The burden isn't on Dave to define every criterion and exact number in order to say it would be just for these people to resign. Based on this turnout." Go for it. You take it.
I just want to say I hate you're saying this principle applies? Well, now you have to justify every single niche circumstance and specific situation in which it applies then. It's like me saying killing is, generally speaking, wrong. Oh, okay. Well, then list out every single possible scenario where killing is not justified or is wrong. And it's like, no, but I can make a general claim and have the principle of that thing be true, like, Dave was doing there. Dave's original, and the funny thing is Dave and this guy went back and forth. I cut those out because they're kind of aside to the point. Dave's first claim here is really not that big of a claim that he's making, right? It's that, the John Hopkins study said lockdowns were bad. These lockdowns or didn't help. These lockdowns ruined lives. People who suggested them should be held accountable. That's kind of the A, B, and C of it, right? And the kicker for this Madrid for NYC is his tag. He's a libertarian. He's a libertarian. He is not a left winger. He's not a right winger.
He's not. But
sorry. He might be, but he's allegedly a libertarian, and he's pushing back, and he's carrying water for the state. He's saying, well, we can't. Oh, so anytime a politician wants to ruin people's lives, and wants to impose some big mandate on their lives, you're gonna punish them for it? What?
Yeah, the part that I get it. Like, maybe just for the sake of the argument, maybe they shouldn't be thrown in jail because maybe they're making the best decision that they knew how in that time period. But at the very least, they should resign and never be elected ever again, right? And this guy's arguing against that. It's like, okay, look, like I know in an organization, like the CEO can't make every decision or is responsible for every, thousands of employees beneath him, how they interact or whether they succeed or fail. But if the company doesn't succeed, the person that is on the chopping block first is usually the CEO because they are responsible for the results of what happens at that organization. If people elect you, or if you are appointed to a position and your whole job is the health of the country, and it turns out that you did not only didn't do anything to help in a time of need, but you actively actually hurt people, even if you made that in the best of intentions, right? Those decisions, it shows that your decision making is incredibly flawed, and at the very least, you should never be allowed ever again towards the levers of power to control people's health decisions. I think that a lot of these folks were making decisions with ill intent, right, to accrue more power. And I think that can be somewhat demonstrated in a lot of different ways, specifically, thinking about Fauci lying to the American people on several occasions and then being called out about it in Congress, in front of where you're supposed to tell the truth, right? Like it's a crime to not tell the truth very explicitly in those scenarios. And he told lies several times. I think you can assign some malintent to that, or at the very least lying before Congress. It's like, at the very minimum, right, that guy should lose his job and should probably spend some time in jail or be fined, right? There are consequences to actions. That is the free market. And if this guy's a libertarian, like I saw his handle, right, deregulation is infrastructure. I was like, oh, that's not a bad handle, like that actually sounds kind of libertarian in some ways.
Well, it's a joke on the meme of everything being infrastructure because of the Biden's infrastructure bill. So it's like, I like that. It's a funny, little tag name.
Yeah, I like it. It's good. And then he just proceeds to make these it's like, dude, did your account get hacked? Like, what happened here?
So yeah, to talk about, because it seems to me that this guy harps in and zones in on the one aspect, which is the criminal charges line. And to me, this is a great example of libertarians really missing the point, which we do a lot when it comes to discourse and argumentation. And I've done it too. So like it's you focus in on one specific aspect and you miss the forest for the trees. And he's talking about, don't ever guess wrong about the future, because if you do, you're going to jail. And it's like, okay, first of all, Dave Smith's claim, if you want to get pedantic about it, is that they would lead to mass resignations and likely criminal charges. He's not saying we have to arrest. He's saying likely criminal charges. So it's not even mandating that right? And then, he says this claim of whenever someone in a position of power makes the mistake, they need to be punished. And it's like, no, Dave Smith is not saying every mistake any politician has made ever needs to be punished. It's the lockdowns, which ruined lives, which set, suicide rates spiraling high. It set job destruction, which destroys families' livelihoods. It destroys their future child's lives because they're growing up in a more impoverished situation. It ultimately causes much worse, entitlement payouts and government inflation, all these kinds of mass effects that destroy countries, destroy individuals' lives. When you make a mistake with those are the consequences, then it's very possible that you might need criminal charges. So it's not any position or any mistake ever. It's not like, this politician said that the budget forecast we would have enough for to spend $1,000 on this event, and we spent $12,000 or $1,200. It's not. There's not like any mistake ever. That's such a silly straw man argument to make for it. And then of course, when you say, well, no, that's not the point. The point is more that this this particular outcome is bad. He's like, you have to enumerate the specific actions that would justify this. And it's like, okay, well, if you want to play that, again, you don't have to do that because that's not the principal position, or that's not the arguing against the principle. But if you want to do that, let's talk about the specific things. And I don't care about what percentage of the population thought it was a good time. If you're restricting people's
They're not
freedom,
in charge.
yeah, right. Like, you're restricting people's freedom. But like you said, so Fauci lying, testifying before Congress, knowing things that are lies. Great. Any governor who violated the Constitution is breaking their vows and breaking the law, technically speaking, for doing this. So anytime, what was that? Was it Governor Murphy who said we weren't thinking about the Constitution when he was asked by the anchor, like, where did you get these powers from the, you know, constitutionally speaking, from the Bill of Rights? Where do you see you get these orders? We weren't that was above our pay grade. We weren't thinking. Okay, then I think to me that's kind of admitting criminal intent, because if you want to go by this, like, you know, you have to break a law to be arrested kind of mentality, like which things need to be punished or whatever. Then that to me that's a pretty good standard to go by. Like, if you're violating someone's Bill of Rights, then yeah, I think that's worth a criminal punishment. But the broader point here is, it's like, man, don't defend the COVID regime, and whatever you do, like, don't make it this weird pedantic argument about, well, they meant well, so it's okay that they destroyed lives. Like, no, you can say, I don't know if we should arrest them, but yeah, like, there needs to be consequences for this. Like, if that's your position, then take that position. Don't be like, wow, I'm more outraged about him saying that politicians who locked down the country for a fruitless result, I'm more mad about him saying that they should go to jail than I am about the fruitless result and the lockdowns. That to me is the most beautiful example of misplaced priorities.
It reminds me, I had a family member who got audited by the IRS, and it was in some document or something, because they were having hearings and things, and there's a caveat in there that was like, ignorance of the law is not an excuse to break the law. It's like what a harsh thing to say, right? That because you made this stupid, terrible tax code that no one can understand, that's reasonable, because no one understands it, including you, if they make a mistake, you know, somewhere in it, like, you can punish them and drag them through 6 months of hearings. And it's like, okay, like, I obviously I don't like that. That's not a position I would advocate to, you know, enforce on anyone else. But that is the position of the government and these bureaucrats that are in power, is that ignorance of the law is not an excuse to break the law. And so if they are going to hold you to that standard, maybe they should also be, you know, submitted to that standard as well, that they're enforcing on everyone. And ignorance, you know, Fauci's ignorance about how to handle the pandemic, as well as his malfeasance in lying to the public, I think definitely, as Dave Smith put it, that should result in his resignation, and likely criminal charges, likely being the key word that will placate this deregulation is infrastructure guy. Yeah. Well, it's, you know, it's just like, just focus on the wrong thing, and then you can't defend a principle unless you enumerate the details. And you're a libertarian. Come on, dude. Stop it. You're making this harder for us all. Like, right now, what we need to do is we need to push back against a state that has seized way too much power, ruined way too many lives over something that so many of us from day one were calling. Like, stop defending them. Stop carrying water for them. If you're not going to actively call for their resignations, then at least just shut up and let people who will, let them call for it. Stop being an active hindrance, you know? Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I don't have any more on this one, unless you do. Nah, we're good. Cool. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with us today on the show. If we said anything that made you cringe, be sure to DM us. We'd love to hear your thoughts or opinions, or even if you agree with us, any sort of opinion you have on that helps us think better about all these different things is very welcomed. You can catch us at cringepost.com, at cringepostpod@gmail.com. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.